Hello and thanks for joining us on Beyond 100 Days. I am Abosede Adeniran-Aderemi. We apologize for starting behind schedule. Join the conversation on X at TVC News NG. Use the hashtag Beyond 100 Days. Today, we're beaming our searchlight on the aviation sector. Since the emergence of the President Bola Tinubu as the President of Nigeria, the aviation sector has been on the front line of some interventions and challenges. The Minister of Aviation and Aerospace Development, Festus Keyamo, described the accomplishment in 2024 as a pivotal milestone, particularly with the completion of the irrevocable deregistration and export request authorization process by the Nigerian Civil Aviation Authority. Now, some of the challenges witnessed in the sector are delay in flight, unscheduled cancellation, and many more. What are the plans in place to make Nigeria's airports more viable and to meet international standards? Managing Director, Federal Airports Authority of Nigeria, Olubunmi Kuku, joins me now on the program. Thank you for joining us on Beyond 100 Days today. At different fora, you have acknowledged the fact that there is a decay in the aviation sector and in the industry, rather. Tell us now, what strategies have you adopted so far to tackle it, and what is the progress report?
Good evening again, and thank you very much for inviting me on the show today. I think we've spent too much time talking about the decay, and it's time to start fixing, and that's exactly what we're doing. What is even more critical is the continuity that is required, meaning that wherever we stop, being the work or the good work of the Honorable Minister and of course of the agencies within the ministry, somebody needs to pick that up, which is the biggest challenge that we see, is that once we have new administration, sometimes we tend not to continue or complete existing projects. So let me talk about the work that we're doing as opposed to what has happened, because I'm sure you've heard me talk about that endlessly. I think the first thing is to block some immediate gaps, and we did that with minor rehabilitation works at a lot of our airports. I'm sure that if you've been a traveling passenger over the last 90 days, you will see that the airports are cleaner, they're friendlier in terms of the atmosphere. We've lit up some of those airports a lot more, and it's more spacious in certain areas. That is just the minimal that we can do in terms of interventions, at least to make sure that while we focus on the large infrastructure projects, and of course rehabilitating some of the facilities, you're able to do that. If you fly through the domestic airport in Abuja, you would notice that there's a lot that has been done. If you came into that airport about 6 months to a year ago, it was dark. It was almost like the Hall of Doom. We've lit up that airport tremendously. We've opened up the space, the seating arrangements in terms of the facility, and of course, what we hear everyone complain about, which is the conveniences. So access or better access for people with disability, making sure that some of the elevators and the escalators are functional, making sure that things like the toilets are also functional, and really focusing on a lot of expansion works across that airport.
All right.
The same thing goes if you go into the north, if you go into the south or the southeast, yes, you will see similar projects and similar progress that is being made.
All right, let's talk about the viability of these airports, because of course it might not be all of them that have been able to attain the level of success that you're describing here. We have about 30 airports in Nigeria, and out of which few are viable, quite manageably. And opinions seem divided as to the best way to manage them. What school of thoughts do you support? Is it shutting down completely the ones that are not thriving in order to pave way for new standard airports?
So let me start by saying that there's some things that we refer to in finance as sunk cost, right? So you've already made the investment in infrastructure. So what you need to do is really to plug that investment so that you can improve your rate of returns. I do not recommend shutting down those airports at all. And if you've had conversations with me over the last few months, what I will say to you is that there are two things. One is the economics of the airports, which is viability. But secondly is also the social impact that the airport brings into driving the economy, or at least helping us to turn around the economy. In terms of the interventions that we're putting through, there are 4 critical areas that we're focusing on in terms of how we flog those airports and improving the state of the airport. So one is to increase economic activity around the airports. Our commercial and business development team, as well as myself, obviously with the guidance of the Honorable Minister, have worked very closely with some of the state government in terms of what they can do. One is largely around cargo. I think cargo is a sweet spot for us in market. The states like Kano, Jos, Ogun State, even though Ogun is not our airport, they're looking to drive cargo effectively as well. But it's not just about building the infrastructure or investing more in the infrastructure on ground. It's really making sure that there's a feeder system that starts all the way from the bottom of the value chain to drive cargo. There are various segments of cargo. I think agro and pharma are 2 critical areas that we have been looking at. Agro specifically around making sure that there's food security, so distribution of food items in market, specifically within Nigeria, and of course, certain items that can be exported. What that means is that in terms of the bottom of the chain, the value systems, making sure that the states are working very closely with DFIs in terms of aggregating the products or the produce that need to go out, making sure that you're sort of aggregating a database that also focuses on packaging, logistics, also testing labs around some of those airports so that we can at least start to drive a lot more cargo activity. So as I mentioned, that is one area. So economic activity, tourism. I know there's been a lot of noise about Dirty December in Lagos. So tourism is one, of course, business activity, and largely around driving GDP. Look, I think if we want to drive economic activity at this airport is really to make sure that we're able to drive the GDP growth, which are the key inhabitants. So that's one. The second is really around improving the infrastructure linkage to the airport facilities. So making sure that a collaboration between ourselves and the state governments, and of course at the federal level as well, making sure that the road network that leads into the airport, making sure that the transit facilities that are available. I'll give some examples. FCT, for example, has a rail line that terminates at the airport. It makes it easier for people to come there, whether they're traveling passengers or to conduct economic activity at the airport. We recently had a meeting with Lagos State government this week. They do have a road that is coming in from Ali Mosho, which will also open up the area. So the linkage is very important in terms of making sure that we can actually drive this activity.
All right.
The third is really around transit hubs. So let me just wrap up very quickly. Is establishing certain locations and transit hubs. Lagos and Abuja, of course, are the main areas that we're looking at. And I mentioned earlier, which is also to prioritize the cargo exports. Thank you very much.
All right. And we know the aviation minister has said at different times, and you have also corroborated that position as to the need for public-private partnership in order to drive the transformation of these airports that we're looking at. Where are we on the concessioning of major airports across the country?
Okay, so I'm glad we're all on the same page that private sector participation is required. A hybrid model is what we've clearly preached for, and that's making sure that for the commercial activities, we're able to commercialize those. You just spoke about the concessions. The Honorable Minister has been working very closely with us at FAAN to make sure that the concession process is thorough. There has been a review. So, of course, there has been a review of the last concession process as well. There were some adverts that were put in the paper, which were more of notices a couple of weeks ago or a couple of months ago, largely around interest or intent in those airports that we're looking to concession. There's some advisory work that is also ongoing in terms of project development and the economics. Now, when it comes to concessions, it's one thing to potentially find a private sector partner to work with you on those concessions. But what is more important is to make sure that you sort of have the same goals. You're able to potentially trash out some of the issues that have potentially arose and will continue to arise around, look, what do you do with the people? The Honorable Minister has clearly said there will be no jobs lost. Of course, that also requires conversation in terms of the economics and the financials of what happens. So currently we're in project development stage.
All right. And, quite recently at an aviation roundtable meeting, you were there as well. And, stakeholders recommended a range of measures, and those included the establishment of an aviation finance bank, which would be a single-digit lending rate for the sector, and of course, the exemption of local refineries from taxation related to production of Jet A1 fuel. What are your thoughts on this?
So while I respect the Aviation Roundtable heavily in terms of their thoughts and their enormous contribution to the sector, I'm actually not of the opinion that we set up another institution for financing. I think that we have a lot of institutions that exist today who are finance houses. So for example, you have some of the commercial banks, even though we know that financing from commercial banks tend to be at double-digit rates. We also have some DFIs, they're private equity institutions that we can look at. What I do think we need is really more specialized banking or specialized financing that we can leverage. We also need to consider things that would help us improve the financing environment. So some sort of financial instruments, credit guarantees, for example, or backstops for the industry. So my focus will rather be on specialized financing and potential credit guarantees to support that.
All right, let's talk about runways. What is the current state? And please provide some level of clarification, about the controversy of the runway construction at 532 billion naira earmarked for the construction of a second runway in Abuja and rehabilitation of other runways in designated airports.
Thank you very much for that question. I believe I've also just received a number of messages following our outing yesterday at the National Assembly. So I'd like to clarify two things. We have a number of runways in Nigeria today. So we'd mentioned to you that there are 22 airports that are owned by the federal government. We also support some airports that are owned by the state. I did make specific reference to airports who had runways that had exceeded their lifespan. The average lifespan of a runway is about 20 to 25 years. A lot of our runways in Nigeria have actually exceeded that time, meaning that we've had them for 30 plus 35 years. And what it means is that we need to actually reconstruct those runways. The reconstruction of those runways, the 580 billion that I initially mentioned, is actually for over 17 runways, and it's not just the runways. It includes the runways, it includes some perimeter roads, it includes fencing. So I've seen some commentary where people are saying, what do they need all of this money for? I encourage you, please just look at Google if you're in the construction business or in the aviation business, to try and understand what it means to build runways, taxiway links, apron expansion work that we need to do, and of course to make sure that we put a safe environment together for everything that happens on the air side. Now, the reference that the Honorable Minister made while we were at the National Assembly yesterday was specific to the second runway project that is happening in Abuja. That project was initially awarded to some consultants and contractors by previous administrations. I believe that from conversations with the ministry, the scope of that project has changed. There's also been price variations, of course, which is affected by the scope and of course FX fluctuations. There's some additional information that has come on which the minister has, which of course provides him with a lot of discomfort around the numbers that has been provided to him. And to that effect, he has largely come out to say, instead of accepting a figure that has been provided to him, he needs to provide more oversight and more scrutiny. And I believe the question is, what is happening with that? Who's handling that project? The project was initially being handled by the ministry, of course, with support from the Federal Airports Authority of Nigeria, which I head. We have had several engagements with the ministry, and we will continue to have that in the next coming weeks so that there's some clarity around that project.
All right, then. And as we begin to wrap up the conversation, let's talk about the recertification of the Lagos and Abuja airports by the Civil Aviation Authority. What does this mean to FAAN, and how could this improve service?
So the The Lagos and Abuja airports are two of our critical gateways. As you know, we have 5 international airports in Nigeria who all provide access to our international community. Before December, when those airports were certified, we were literally running airports that are not being certified, which is largely against the global standards that airport run by. There were a number of gaps that were identified. Some were safety and security related. Some had to do with the state of the infrastructure. Some had to do with policy and documentation. We were able to close a significant amount of gaps, but it doesn't mean that the work stops. There's still some work that needs to be done around those runways to make sure that we're operating at optimal standards, and we're working very closely with the Civil Aviation Authority on that. That's just 2 runways. The priority for the Nigerian Civil Aviation Authority and ourselves at FAAN is to make sure that we can certify the other international airports. The team has been working jointly and very closely over the last couple of weeks to make sure that we can achieve the same success that we did for Lagos and Abuja.
All right. Now there are reported cases of touting at airports, bribery, and accusations that some officials actually collude with passengers to launder drugs and money. You spoke tough in a viral video on this. How is FAAN dealing with it at the moment?
I'm sure you know that in Nigeria, in this economy, there's no hard decision or policy that is put out that does not face any resistance. We have faced some resistance with the implementation of that policy, but I assure you that the Honorable Minister and I are extremely relentless. We have come out, we have engaged with our communities, and of course with the Security Council that we meet with. The Nigerian Civil Aviation Authority has also had multiple sessions, and we have made sure that all of the agencies that are working very closely with us understand the implications of our actions. We did find 1 or 2 people who were culpable. I mentioned that we have a magistrate court that has been set up in some of our locations. We do make sure that they're prosecuted, they're set as good examples. And I also want to use this medium to let every Nigerian know that if you are stopped at the airport and someone is asking you to support them in any illicit activities, you will find yourself culpable along with those officials. So I'm saying very boldly again, and I'm supporting my Honorable Minister to say that our airports are tout-free zones, and we ask that you stop. We are putting in all necessary measures from our end to make sure that that stops as well, of course, with the continued support of the National Security Advisor and the Security Council, which we meet. So it's also our responsibility as Nigerians. You've heard me say it, you've heard the minister say it. If any agency, including mine, comes to you within the airport premises and wants to engage in such activities, it is your responsibility to tell them no. If they ask you for funding, tell them no.
Now, after about 1 year in office, are you overwhelmed by the enormity of task before you? I mean, are you willing to step on toes to get the necessary reforms in place in our airports?
I have stepped on toes. I'm still stepping on toes. I do know that I need to do that with caution, but definitely not at the jeopardy of the Nigerian airport system. If I have to, I will step down and I will resign if I realize that it's not working. But what is important for me is to make sure that I do what is right. I do the needful, largely in terms of making sure that there are critical infrastructure projects in front of me, making sure that Nigerians are safe. I continue to say that safety is my priority in the industry, making sure that our runways, our pavements, our airfield lighting are up to par to make sure that we can do that. So the thoughts around, stepping on toes or being overwhelmed, if I'm tired, I will get out of the job.
Managing Director, Federal Airports Authority of Nigeria, Olubunmi Kuku, thank you so much for joining us on the program today.
Thank you very much. It was indeed a pleasure.
Well, that's our program today. We thank you very much for watching. There's a repeat tonight at midnight and, of course, at 6 a.m. Do join us. You can also watch on our social media and also on our YouTube channel. I am Abosede Adeniran-Aderemi. Bye for now.